Hey everyone, I wanted to come on here today and just talk about some of the things my clients have been saying, which really rings true. And that's been about people think they should feel a certain way or they think they should say a certain thing. And what I mean by that is when I ask a client how they're really feeling about something, they want to tell me how they should feel about it because they know better. But you see, until you tell the truth, until you say what you really feel or what you really think, you actually can't do anything about it. You don't own it, right? So when you're saying, oh, I should think this way, or I should be grateful, or I should be happy because I have all these things, or I have this life, or I should be doing something. The bottom line is you don't. If you don't feel that way, if you don't think that way, if you don't do that, whatever it is, that's okay, because it's more important to actually own it, right? So when you and this is another thing that really gets me is the amount of clients or people I come across just in general conversation. And I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I was at the Expand conference in the ACT and I was a keynote speaker and I was speaking about my journey on Kokoda. And after the talk, there was breakout rooms that everyone could go into. And there was different people in different rooms who were presenting, and I was in a room where I was presenting. And I had a mirror sitting there. And of course, I had about 30 or 40 women come in. These were all EAs and PAs in the ACT who were at these awards. And everyone who walked in was quite curious. And as usual, people start filling up at the back and slowly move their way forward. And unless you're a person like me, I go straight for the front. I want to hear everything. I want to see everything if I'm attending. My time's valuable, so I want to get the most from it. And I noticed everyone who was walking in looking at the mirror. I was being very observant of what was happening, the body language, all of those kinds of things. And it was interesting because we were talking about self-esteem and all of those things that I love to talk about. And I asked people how often they looked in the mirror. In fact, I asked everyone to put their hand up who looks in the mirror and says that they love themselves. You know, like, I love me, that kind of love, not I love myself from an ego perspective. And it was interesting because only like 5 people out of about 35, 40 women put their hand up. And this always does surprise me. Anyway, as they've put their hands back down, and I'm like, okay, who in the room has children? And more than half the room, I would say 3/4 of the room put their hand up. And I said to them, okay, so I'm guessing you don't tell your children you love them. And they were kind of like shocked by what I said. And I knew that wasn't true, but I wanted a reaction, and that was, of course, I tell my children I love them. I'm like, okay, and do you want your children to love themselves? Oh, absolutely. How important is that? Extremely important, they said. And I'm like, but why aren't you leading by example? Why aren't you loving yourself enough to lead by example? And you saw the look on their face. You saw the aha moments come in where people were going, you know what? That's right. I have to lead by example. And, at the end of that, it was really about people understanding the importance of self-love, and we talk about self-care and self-love and all of those things and how important they are. And I think both men and women today are starting to realize how important they are. And, we've got to tell a different story, but we have to tell the story that's in our head first, right? What is the story? What do I love about myself? What am I proud of? What do I want to take into my future? What do I want my children to remember? Or what do I want my family to remember? And when we start to think about all the things that we do love about ourselves, we start to feel differently. We have a different relationship with ourself, right? And it's important to have a good relationship with ourselves, because how do you have a good relationship externally if you don't have a good relationship internally, right? So that's very, very important. Now, I remember walking along the Camino, and it was about day 2. And I remember asking myself, because I'd had quite a challenge leading up to the Camino. In fact, for quite some years, I'd had some significant challenges in my life. And 2 years prior to walking the Camino, my mother had had cancer. She'd recovered. She's doing fabulously. And now she's, a couple of years into being completely cancer-free. But I remember walking the Camino, and I said to myself, I had lots of conversations with myself, and I asked myself will I always feel this broken? And even probably before that sentence had finished coming out, there was a voice in my head, and it was quite a gruff voice that said, "Girl, you ain't broken. Broken women don't walk the Camino. They curl up in a ball, throw their hands in the air, and give up. So get up, get on with it, and do what you came here to do." And that was to walk 860 kilometers across the Camino. It was to find myself again. It was to heal. It was to forgive. It was to find that joy and peace internally that I needed so desperately to find, because I'd lost it working too much, focused on all the wrong things, focused on the things that weren't really important in life. And so I did continue on that, and my story became very different, the story that I was telling myself every day. Now, I'm not saying everyone has to take a journey like the Camino. That was what I needed, and so I walked. But what's your journey? What's your story? What's the story you're saying every day? And if you're not living your best life, if you're not living the way that you get great happiness and peace every single day, then maybe it's time to tell a different story. Maybe it's time to do something different. Maybe it's time to just simply take control and not allow external forces to have such an impact. Now, we can watch the news, we can be affected by what's going on in the world, we can have lots of different experiences, but at the end of the day, we are in control of what happens in here and the stories that happen in here. So I really encourage you to look in the mirror and ask yourself what you see. Who do you see looking back at you? Who are you? Are you happy? Are you joyful? Are you living your best life? Or are the things that you really want to do, are you not doing them because of someone else's story? Or because of negative voices that are telling you you're not enough to do it? You're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not old enough, you're not young enough, whatever the story is. Simply tell the story, tell the truth, looking in the mirror, and then ask yourself, is that true? Anyone who wants to write a book, just look at Louise Hay, who started her writing in her 70s. Look at other people who have started writing well after their 50s. I used to have a story that I'm writing a book, which I am writing a book, but the story was, who's going to want to read my book? And when I thought about that and asked myself the question of, are people really going to want to read my book? The answer is yes. I actually have people who say, can I have the first copy? People do want to read it. So I had to get rid of that story of nobody's going to want to read my book. So what is the story that you're saying? And is it time to get rid of that story? Because we all have something to give. No matter what we're doing in life, we have something to give. What have you got to give? There's something in there. Just dig a little deeper and find it. But take a look in the mirror and tell yourself a different story. So till next time, thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate your time.